We were looking for cities where there's been an uptick or an upsurge in violent crime, most recently. And then we're taking those cities and looking for cities where there's a really good police force, strong police leadership, and political leaders like mayor who are generally supportive of law enforcement efforts. And Cleveland and also the law enforcement community worked very closely and had a good relationship with our federal law enforcement, the U.S. Attorney and others. And Cleveland was, one of the very top cities that met all those criteria.
When you say an uptick, are we talking about over the past 4 or 5 months? Are we talking about year over year?
Much earlier, before COVID, last year, toward the end, we were going to be moving against violent crime in a broad array of cities, and we started this program called Relentless Pursuit. But then COVID came along just as we were deploying agents for it, and sort of aborted that project. Then in the interim, we had Minneapolis, we had the COVID and people staying home and so forth, and the disruption that involved. And starting, after the civil disturbances that were in late May, we started seeing increases in crime in a number of cities around the country. And that's really what we're addressing now under this project.
And so just to be clear, crime not related to protests and unrest that we've seen, you mean specific crime within neighborhoods?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thanks for making that clear. I'm not talking about civil disturbances and riots. I'm talking about a phenomenon that's come in the wake of that, which is, and I think there are a lot of different factors contributing to it, but of violent crime, street crime, shootings especially, homicides, and also non-fatal shootings have really gone up sharply in a number of cities, including Cleveland. But we're seeing it in many, many cities.
You mentioned Operation Relentless Pursuit. Are the additional officers set to come to Cleveland, is it 25 from what I understand?
I think it's more than that right now, 25-ish.
25-ish. Was that already a part of Operation Relentless Pursuit?
Yeah, they were. I think they were going to be part of. Then a lot of these, we call them TDYs, temporary duty stations. A lot of them were not really deployed. They were commitments by the different agencies to send them, but now we're having them deployed.
And so, there's a lot of pushback, I think, and people concerned that this is a political move. Mm-hmm. You already had Operation Relentless Pursuit, and it wasn't until after the unrest that we've seen at the end of May that Operation Legend came about. Mm-hmm. Is this political?
Well, Operation Legend is responding to something that has happened, which is an objective fact, which is really high levels of homicide increases and shootings.
In democratic cities?
Well, most cities are run by Democrats. It's not that it's a Democratic city. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure if the leadership of all the cities are Democrats, but most cities are run by Democrats. But that's where the crime is. That's where the crime is that we're trying to address. That's what's driving the volume of crime. And yeah, it's an election year, but I can't pick when I'm Attorney General. I'm Attorney General now. People are getting killed. The community wants to be safe. Do we sit back and do nothing because it's a political year? And I think it's important right now that people be reminded that the primary duty of government is providing for safety, and all the social justice ideas and other things that people have could never take root and never achieve anything if the streets are running in blood. You can spend all the money you want on education, but you can't have the schools run by gangs. Who's going to take them out? Police.
What do you say? Because I've spoken to some people within these communities. Mm-hmm. While they may be concerned about crime, they're also concerned about the idea of federal agents who are not from this area coming in, not having ties here, and the concern over that and how they might interact with the community, especially when the community has been working so hard to do better with police and community relations. Right. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would say, number one of the reasons that, well, first, most federal officers do come in for a period of time and then leave and go elsewhere. We rotate people, and not every federal officer has long-standing ties to the community, but federal law enforcement has operated in these cities, including Cleveland, for, a century, decades. People know. The gangs know about ATF. They know about the FBI. They know about the DEA. We're not aliens. We have been operating in these cities for a long time. And the way we operate is exactly how we're operating now, through joint task forces, a blend of federal and state investigators working together. That's what we've been doing for at least 35 years. And we bring resources. We bring millions of dollars that go toward hiring more police, paying overtime for our task force, all of the state and police officers who are working in these task forces, and technology like ShotSpotter, which instantaneously tells you where the shot is fired in the city. We're contributing resources to Cleveland to make it a safer place. As far as the community ties are concerned, the ties between federal law enforcement and the Cleveland police are very, very strong. And the federal government, through our grant programs, actually provides resources to upgrade and support community policing programs at police departments. So the liberal talking point that, this is an invasion by, federal troops is just nonsense. This is, classical crime fighting, and the federal government is doing this now under Operation Legend in cities and with police forces that we've long been partnered with.
So what will these specific 25 officers be doing? You mentioned ATF, you mentioned, other federal agents. What will they specifically be doing? Are they working behind the scenes, or are they going to be out on the streets patrolling as well?
Well, when task forces go out and develop a case, they're working on that task force along with the state people. I was just over at the police department and met with the anti-gang unit, and many of the officers there were task force officers. They were Cleveland police, who are also members of the federal task force. And right down the hall, you have federal people working here in federal buildings. You have state units embedded, and there's a lot of sharing information and developing the cases together. The federal government can bring a lot of resources and tools that the states don't have. Sometimes the more dangerous people have to be held before trial, and the federal government is more capable of doing that. Our laws allow for it more. Also, when people flee the jurisdiction or witnesses make themselves scarce outside Cleveland or in a different state, it's easier for the federal government to locate them and things like that. So I think the police would tell you here that we're a multiplier. Working with the federal government makes them much more effective than they otherwise would be.
There was one, I think one criticism that we heard from city leaders when we were talking about Operation Legend, and that was the fact that the first time they heard about it was through us, the media. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason why it wasn't told to Cleveland leaders before it was announced publicly?
Well, I think it was probably socialized with Cleveland leaders before we did it.
They didn't know. They didn't know about it until we called. That's what the mayor said.
Well, the operation itself was developed not in the context of particular cities, but conceptually. And then, as I said, we've gone through a number of cities and decided which ones we could be most effective in. And I've told you the reasons why we've come to Cleveland, and I think there have been discussions by the U.S. Attorney with his law enforcement counterparts.
But still no reason why they weren't told first?
I don't know whether they were told first, and I don't know, if there was miscommunication, where it lies. But I think my understanding is that the mayor supports law enforcement efforts and supports Operation Legend.
Final question. My producers wanted me to ask about Steve Bannon being charged with fraud. I guess what are your thoughts on that? And then some might argue that this is another indictment on the Trump administration, people who've been involved.
Well, I mean, he wasn't part of the Trump administration during these activities. This was well after he left the Trump administration. It didn't have anything to do with the president or the administration.
But he was his advisor.
It was a private effort. Do you believe in guilt by association?
Nothing else?
No.
All right. Anything else you want to say, or you think it's important for people to know, especially the people of Cleveland, when it comes to Operation Legend?
Well, I think that from my experience, I go around the country a lot, and I talk to black leaders in the inner city, and by leaders I don't mean the people who hog all the time on television but don't actually live in the communities and don't have any attachment to the safety and the prosperity of communities. And they all tell me that they support the police, they want more police, they do want to see some stronger relationship built with the community through community policing programs, but they do want the violent people off the streets, and that's what this program is trying to do.
You mentioned before that generally speaking, you don't believe that there's systemic racism within police departments. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of explain what you mean by that? Because there are officers who believe that there is systemic racism within police departments, specifically here in Cleveland.
Yeah. Well, people, I think, are sort of sloppy in the way they use the word systemic. I mean, I'm not sure. Systemic could be used in the sense that there are widespread manifestations of people who have racist attitudes, so that, sort of widespread instances where individuals manifest racism, or it can. What I take it as meaning, and how I have reacted against it, is the idea that the institution, by its very nature, has it built into the system. And that's an idea that has emerged fairly recently. And I don't think that's true in many American institutions, and certainly not the police. I don't think it's built into police departments. I also think there's also a shifting, the idea of racism has shifting meaning. Are we talking about, deep-seated antipathy toward people based on their race, so that an individual who's a racist doesn't believe somebody else, is fully human or entitled to all the dignity and rights as a being person? Or are we talking about, a tendency to stereotype people when we meet them? And there's a difference between the two, and I think a lot of the rhetoric about racism sort of lumps everything together. I think all human beings tend to use stereotypes initially when confronted with a new situation, because that's how we process information. What kind of situation, am I at risk? Is this a good or bad encounter, and so forth? And we tend to cycle back and use our experience. And I think it's important for police and others in a pluralistic society like ours to make sure that we're conscious of that, and make sure that we don't reduce people that we deal with to stereotypes. And I think the police do that very well, probably as well as any institution in the United States, in training